So the Big Ten and SEC might be working on a scheduling alliance to where you would see more games between the SEC and the Big Ten, which I think is a good thing. Better games are a good thing for college football. If you look at the non-conference slates for a lot of high-profile programs, very rarely do you go like, oh my gosh, wow, holy cow. It just doesn't really happen all that frequently. You might have a game that was well-intentioned when it was scheduled, where you play somebody that 10 years ago would have been like, holy hell, and then now it, okay, whoop-de-doo. But when you have programs like that, or you have a Big Ten versus SEC challenge type situation, it's much more likely that you're going to get paired up with somebody who is worth your while to play a non-conference. It's going to make your fan base excited. It's going to get people to the stadium. It's going to get eyeballs on TV. It's going to get recruits that want to be in your stadium for that game. I think those are all undeniably good things for college football. Now, it's real easy to just go like, I don't need to think about what that looks like because I know who's in the Big Ten. I know who's in the SEC. But when you start to connect the dots of what games could happen the first couple of weeks of the season compared to what we get right now, I think that's really interesting to look at. So I went through and made mock matchups of like, here is what a Big Ten versus SEC challenge on the gridiron could look like. So we'll start with games that would be like at SEC at Big Ten. LSU at Ohio State, two big, passionate fan bases who can bicker and argue about who really gets to stake the claim of Joe Burrow. That would be an awesome series. Texas A&M at Michigan State. You can call it the Little Brother Bowl. That's a shot at both teams. Not fair. Georgia at Oregon. Missouri at Illinois. Missouri at Illinois feels like that could be a natural rivalry. South Carolina at UCLA. I know that UCLA's uniforms, when they play at home versus SC, look great. Then you're playing SC. You can figure out if UCLA can lose to SC twice in one season. Florida at Washington. If you're going to traipse across the country diagonally, might as well put those two together. Mississippi State and Purdue. Hey, those are two programs that I forgot existed. Awesome. And then Arkansas and Minnesota. You guys can go back and forth and argue about who was better at football in the 1930s. It'd be really cool. Plus, it's one of those, like, there's a big, I think sticking point is probably the sticking point for Big Ten fans that are like, I want to see SEC schools play in the North in the winter. Minnesota, it's almost always winter. That's a joke, but it's the coldest I've ever been. I was in Bemidji, Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. And as I was going to the airport, like as I'm in the airport to go up to my flight, they say, oh, hey, by the way, don't touch the handrails on the jet bridge because you'll get stuck like the kid from A Christmas Story, because it was a negative 35 wind chill outside, and they don't heat those bad boys up. Good to know. So late September, Arkansas, Minnesota, the Razorback players and the fans might think they've already hit winter. But since that's the big sticking point, you should probably like, hey, we're going to put LSU or Florida. But some of those schools, they got winter this winter. At one point, I have a cousin that lives on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain. She had more snow on the ground than I did here in Western Ohio. Like, it's wild. But when you look at those matchups of like, hey, Ohio State, instead of playing Grambling and Ohio, or instead of playing Grambling, you're going to play LSU. Michigan State, instead of playing Central Michigan, which they might want to play, you're going to play Texas A&M. Those are badass big-time games. I think those are really cool matchups. Missouri, Illinois feels like a game that can absolutely turn into a yearly rivalry. And there are other ones in those inside the Big Ten versus SEC. If you were to add Big Ten at SEC games, Michigan at Alabama is a great game. USC at Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin is dying, I'm sure, to play the Trojans. Nebraska at Oklahoma, even though we've gotten it the last couple of years due to athletic administrators pulling their heads from their asses, I still think that Nebraska at Oklahoma feels like a game that can be played every year. Iowa at Auburn. We don't have to wait for the Outback Bowl for this game to happen. We can just play it right now in the regular season. Penn State at Texas. It's another one of those like, hey, we can talk about how great we used to be. But you can't tell me that Texas fans wouldn't be more excited to see a school like Penn State come to their stadium, come to Austin, or Texas go to Penn State rather than play insert group of 5 school here. Wisconsin at Tennessee. 2 programs that have been at the cusp of getting over the hill over the course of the last 25 years or so. Indiana at Kentucky. Northwestern at Vanderbilt. Battle of the academics, baby. Get those smart kids going up against each other. Indiana at Kentucky, to me, feels like the same spot as the Nebraska-Oklahoma, as the Illinois-Missouri, and that it's geographical rivalries. And Northwestern and Vanderbilt feels like one of those academic rivalries. They are going after the same students. They are worried about the same kids coming to their programs because they're looking out for brainiacs. So when you put all of those things together, when you say, hey, because it's easy right now to just say, okay, the big teams in the Big Ten are Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, USC, Oregon. The big schools in the SEC are Florida, Georgia, LSU, Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Tennessee. But when you really sit down and look at it, and when you go, these are legitimately possible, maybe even probable matchups, doesn't that get you just a little bit antsy in your pantsy that you want to see this rather than another SEC versus FCS school, another Big Ten versus Group of 5 directional school? I don't have a need to see that. If you look back at the biggest upsets of the 2024 college football season, is one of those cases on there? Sure. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. Outside of that, it was Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Ohio State lost to Michigan. Louisville lost to Stanford. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Alabama lost to Oklahoma. You can keep going down that list. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. They're all kind of interconference. You don't get enough opportunities, I don't think, to see the best on best, right? You don't get to see regular season top 5 out of conference matchups, top 10 out of conference matchups, because in the past, it has not benefited anybody to play those games. You lose, you're out of the college football playoff race. I've mentioned this before, but Bob Stoops, somebody had said to Bob Stoops one time, like, well, you're going to get rewarded for playing a good non-conference schedule. And he laughed and was like, I'll believe that when I see it. And through the 14 college football playoff, nobody ever really got benefited from playing a tough non-conference schedule. And it was the chief argument for Alabama after they didn't get their way in the 12-team playoff was, well, I guess we're never going to play a good, tough non-conference schedule ever again. You didn't play a tough non-conference schedule in 2024. The teams you lost to stunk. And that's why you didn't get into the college football playoff. You lost to Vanderbilt. And you lost to Oklahoma, who were not good. Non-conference scheduling has never really benefited anybody. And maybe that's the one bright side if the SEC and the Big Ten demand that they get 4 automatic spots to the college football playoff. That, hey, we'll be better off to schedule big-time non-conference games. How easy it is to change the perception of the average college football fan, because there are people who believe that the 2024 season sucked because Notre Dame and Ohio State met for the national championship, and arguably 2 of the biggest upsets of the season happened to those 2 schools, and they got to rectify their issues. It didn't completely derail their seasons. Now, I'm never going to be in favor of one loss completely derailing your season, especially a loss that happens in September. Like, the idea that you're the same team in September as you were on January 20th feels ridiculous to me. But that's the mindset of the average college football fan. So if we can get to a point where somebody going 9-3 in the regular season But instead of playing the Citadel, they played Michigan. Instead of playing Mercer, they played Ohio State. I think the sport is undeniably better for it and is in a much better position to see those big-time matchups that are going to draw eyeballs to college football. Want to know your thoughts. Who are your dream Big Ten versus SEC matchups? Would love to read them in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.